the corner. We've been busy in meetings, just broke 3 weeks of draft meetings. I've been really impressed how the draft meetings have gone and really the entire draft process. Just the communication, the collaboration with coaches, scouts, really the entire organization. We've had a lot going on, a lot of players coming and going, so it's been all hands on deck, and it's been really impressive. Just in regards to the draft, we feel good with where we're at. We have 8 picks. We have the 12th pick in the draft. One thing we know, we're going to get a really good player at 12. We've had teams call to move up. We've had teams call to move back. We have flexibility, but we do know at 12, if we stand pat, we're going to get a really good player. And with that, we'll take your questions.
Yeah, guys, you said really good player at 12. You know, doesn't it have to be, given this standard around here with more Super Bowls and losing seasons for a long time, Elway, Manning, don't you have to get a quarterback?
Look, I mean, do we have to draft a quarterback? You'd say, man, it sure looks like we have to draft a quarterback, and yet it's got to be the right fit, the right one. And if we had the tip sheets as to who everyone else was taking, it'd be easier to answer that question. And so that's the puzzle here.
What you don't want to do, Mike, is force it. And, otherwise we'll be in this position next year and the years after. So you want to get the right player at 12. Our first pick we got to hit on, whether it's a quarterback, whether it's a tackle, receiver, you name it. We need to get an impact player.
For either of you, Sean, you sort of alluded to it. Is it with the number of quarterbacks that are in the mix this year and the number of teams that could use one, does it feel like there's more uncertainty about how the first 10 or so picks shake out, or is it about normal in that regard?
Well, I think typically speaking, every year at this time, obviously there's a lot of attention on the draft. It's exciting. I think it's obviously exciting for us, the scouts, everyone involved, but also I think it's exciting for the fans. Meaning, that some may have gotten a glimpse of these guys at the combine, but there's, in where I'm going is, it's generally the first round, and if you really narrow it down, the focus for the fans are like those first 15 picks, and yeah, the part of the puzzle. If we were looking at our draft board and you looked at the screen and you said team needs, there's a handful of teams ahead of us where you'd say quarterback, and then there's a team or two, Minnesota, ourselves, the Raiders. You could argue quarterback, and that's what makes it this year a little interesting. But I think 95%. Every year, 95% of the discussion is on 5% of the draft, because it's hard for anyone to say, God, I like this guy in the 4th round. Wait a minute, I can't keep track of that. I got to go to work. I got the first round figured out, for the fan. So I think each year there's years that's stronger in certain positions, and then the team needs factor into that.
Sean, a couple months ago at the Combine, you alluded to having a lot of belief in y'all's quarterback evaluation process.
Yeah.
So now that you've been through a couple months of meetings, interviews, all that, what did you kind of learn from that process, and do you feel even stronger about your faith in the process you guys have?
Yeah, I think the business we're in the beginning, we have all the tape. And then you're gathering as much information as you can. You're gathering all the metric, the stuff we can measure. Then you're gathering the interaction, personality, learning, which is very important. There's all of that so that you can make the best decision relative to how you grade them. You're obviously, historically speaking, you'd say that it's not a perfect science. We met last night we have a great analytics department, and you're going to see in the next 5, 10 years, AI, artificial intelligence, begin to, help in this process as now again, you have to provide it with what you think is important. And so I think it's, man, there's been a lot of flights, a lot of miles traveled, but for good reason. And the process, back to what George said, the process is gone really good. It hadn't been easy all the time, and yet we've had really good discussions down there. And yeah.
Sean, Coach and George, this is for both of you. When you look at the quarterback position, when you rank your board, all your players in an order, but when you, at 12, do you allow yourself to say, this quarterback for us is 22, but at 12 is where we're staying, we can't move? Does that figure into it, the value of the position as to where you draft, to where you have that player ranked on your draft board, or does the quarterback become that great just overrule stuff?
Well, I'll give you my 2 cents, and then I think historically speaking, our league has always valued certain positions, quarterback, tackles, corners, pressure players, and so that factors into the grade. And Belichick was on this podcast the other day, which was kind of interesting because you get a chance to hear him in a different light, and I've gotten to know him over the years, and he said something that was interesting. He's like, look, every one of these teams' boards are different, like dramatically. And then obviously when you move away from one, the margin of difference expands. In other words, as you get closer to one, they're still different. And so, but do we factor in the position they play relative to, yeah. I mean, we're in these group studies in the 5th round, and in the middle of the 5th round, let's say 6 players, and one of them's an edge player, and the other's, I don't know, tight end or guard. I don't know that there's any such thing as they're equal, but the edge player has more value.
We're going through that now. We're going through all sorts of clusters throughout the draft, and we may have a guy in pod 2, so to speak, who's 1, and another guy who's 7. The other guy may be an edge player. We value him more, So to answer your question, if it's within reason, now you don't want the huge reach, but if they're in similar graded areas, pods, whatever you want to, buckets, and then you take the value position, whether it's quarterback, whether it's edge, whether it's corner, what they are. And so they are a premium. You can't reach too much for those guys, so.
George and Coach, for both of you guys, you've talked about the importance of the quarterback being able to process what he's seeing out there, do that quickly. How do you project out if that's something he can improve at, if that's something that's going to take 3 months, 6 months, a year? I guess just what is that process like in terms of figuring out his ultimate capability there from that standpoint?
Go ahead.
Well, I just think we've just spent as much time as we can with these players. We give them the test in the offseason. We watch them in the Senior Bowl. We watch them in the fall. You try to project. You try to spend it. We fly them in. We spend as many hours with these quarterbacks as any other players. And so nothing's definite, but you try to project what we'll be like. Obviously, the tape tells you one thing, and then the meetings, the testing, getting around your building, the fit. You're never 100% certain, but you try to project. You play the odds as much as you can, and you do that by getting around these players as much as possible.
There's a lot of discussion. The scouts do a great job. There's a lot of discussion with not just the quarterback position, with all of these positions as to their ability to learn, retain, and so typically speaking, we'll get a large group of players. Is he an A learner? That happens right away. B learner. But the default bin is the C learns. In other words, the college coaches that help us out tremendously, they're great, and if this guy's going to need work, he's a C learner. But, man, doing this a long time, I don't know that I've ever heard someone say he's an F or a D learner. And so there's a huge bin of C-learns that we have to dive into to put a C-learn, which means, hey, he's a C-learn or he's not, and then it's something. Now, relative to the quarterback position, is that standard a little different? Sure, because of their job description and what they have to do. And that, I think, is something that's been part of the journey here the last couple of months. I mean, you watch the tape, but how do they spit it out in the huddle? There's a lot of different offenses. It's funny when we bring some of these guys in or we go to the schools to visit and, always finish with, hey, if we take you, drop your best play. The play has to come with you. You just love this play, and they'll draw it up. And then I'll say, well, how do you call it? And I'm always fascinated to hear their terminology. A lot of times they're signaling plays in. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's the one thing by just watching film that's hard to predict. And it's not like it's fail-safe when you go out. We try to send them a lot of information at a certain time the day before, go in, see how much they can digest the next day. We do as much as we can. We try to improve on that each year because even like last night, we spent 2 hours last night with analytics relative to these position evaluations and relative to AI and all these other things that can begin to help us, let's say increase our batting average in general in the draft process.
I guess for both of you guys, even though you're locked in on your stuff, if you're listening to a Belichick podcast, you're aware there's stuff out there being said. How amused are you during this process when you see people so matter-of-factly say what you're thinking or which players you guys love or what you're definitely going to do or put this big package together for this or that?
It's good to have a pulse of what's going on out there. I probably don't listen to as many podcasts as Sean, but it's good to have a pulse of the league, obviously. You take it with a grain of salt. I mean, really, we don't even know who we're picking at the time. We're at 12. We don't know who's going to be there. We're going through every scenario in the first, the third, the fourth. We don't know, so I don't know how anyone else knows. And then when we know, it's only going to be Sean and I. So you listen to it. You have a pulse of the league. It's really good to have a pulse, and then no one knows.
I think, too, it's back to what I said before. I think it's one of the more exciting times of the year for the fan of each team. And listen, I've got, you name it. I mean, there are people that'll, you get tagged on Twitter. And so when I read periodically these things, and then maybe read something that's a little closer to the vest than I like, and I'll click all right, that's, Timmy in Tucson. I don't have to worry about him. He's just right. But I do think it's exciting for the fans, and I think our league has done a really good job as this has grown. Where it used to be just in this hotel ballroom, and you think about it, you had to run up your runner with a piece of paper and the name hopefully spelled correctly and lay it down, and then if it's not in time, George, then someone can pass you. Like that's happened. And where we've come in the different cities that get to host it. So I think the big challenge for the scouts, for George and I, for Greg, Carey, for everyone involved in the process is, I call it this NFL train, and it's this sum total of thinking that if you're not careful, you have to pay attention to it, but just don't hop on it. And let's say that train is 2/3 right, but it just marches along with information, and you don't really know who's driving it. You follow me? But you just know, and so that can influence grades. Meaning, 20 years ago, you were grading players, and it's, the hardest thing for a scout is you're quiet, you're in a hotel room with a computer, and you're typing up a report, and you're going by what you just see. And maybe then you come back home, and then you another report, and then But now there's so much that can taint that if you're not careful, that's all. And the coaches, anyone involved in the process, I think that's a challenge.
I've got a two-part question for you guys over here. You mentioned the start of the off-season program. How has that been in the first week with guys back in the building? And then the second part, you mentioned Greg, Sean, he invested in a new field house turf. Is that important for player safety, and what will that allow you to use it more?
Yeah, so the off-season program began Monday. Man, the turnout was great. We're probably, I'd say 98% in the 2 or 3 individuals that weren't here. I've just talked with all of them. And I think the one thing, and this is a credit to Bo and a lot of people, really, the people all involved in the weight room and the athletic training room, the people that are treating our players. You know, we had a big goal of, like, how do we reduce the injuries? I mean, shoot, the first training camp I had with you guys, we had someone get hurt, and it was like, man, here it goes again. And I was like, I don't know that it's ever happened before, but we went from 32nd in the league to games missed by players on your roster to first in the league by fewest. So we went from 100 and some to 30 some in 1 year. And I think the simple message on Monday was, that's what we're doing right now. You know, it's not football right now. We're getting our bodies. And look, we're in the business of selling. You know, it's optional to be here. I think the player today wants to be somewhere where they feel like, man, they are getting a real good workout. They're getting the food, all the things that go into it, the recovery, if it's a player who's coming off an injury. They want to feel like they're getting that. And compared to maybe where they do it in the off season, if they feel like where they're coming from is accomplishing more than when they get here, then that's not good. And so the purpose for that message with me was, hey, we're heading the right direction here. Like, look, our job is to maximize your earning potential, win games, and the first step in doing that is keeping you healthy. And so that dramatic of a turnaround in 1 year, there's a ton of people that get credit for that. And so it began, but I don't want them, when they pull into the parking lot, feeling like they're coming to practice. You know, it's April. I want them to feel like they're coming to get in shape and to take care of their bodies, and that part of it's been good. And the turf field, I'm sorry, George just mentioned it. So it's the first time I saw it. I hadn't been over here yet, but it looks fantastic.
Sean, intrigued what you said about AI. Is there kind of a race in the league right now to kind of figure out best practices, how it's going to really help you? Do you put somebody sort of fully in charge of that kind of department? How does it work in terms of how you guys are trying to manage how to use that tool?
I think, look, George had we have a great group that, man, it's impressive, our group. Fortunately, it's not a race like long-term. No, but I'm just watching this Netflix series on the Manhattan Project, and that was an important race. But I would say, I think there's always a sense of urgency of getting ahead and creating within the framework of the rules advantages that can help you as a club. And I would say, the only thing I would say is we're always opening the door as an eager listener to new ways, and we have to do that as teachers. And in the same way when we're evaluating players, how do we do this better? And it just so happened last night we had a pretty lengthy meeting on it that was fascinating. And I think it was good.
This is for George and for Sean. I'm going to start with you, George, because you're the one who said it at the beginning of the press conference. You said you feel that you can get a really, really good player at number 12. With that on your board, and it could change, do you have 5 quarterbacks in that top 12 right now?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about our board right now, but I appreciate the question. But I do think it is a good quarterback class. There's 7, 8 quarterbacks that we like that think can play in the league one day. I'm not going to get into, how we have them rated or in the top 10. No, I know, but I'm not gonna go there. But it is a good quarterback class. It's been fun getting to know them, 7 or 8 of them. And so we think we can get a quarterback early. We think mid-rounds. We think there's gonna be quarterbacks, throughout the draft that are interesting to us.
Any concern, I know it's optional and all that, with Cortland not being here, the message he might be getting?
Yeah, I mean, it's 100% voluntary, Mike. It's the first week of the off-season program. Sean's talked to Cortland. I've talked to Cortland. He's in a good place. We'll just leave it at that.
And then to change gears just a little bit, Sean, a couple weeks ago, you were a hockey coach for the Blues in the alumni game. How did that come about, and what did you
Well,
think of that experience?
Listen, it was interesting. So there was a benefit for leukemia or cancer in St. Louis, and a good friend of mine is fighting that battle right now, Kelly Chase, and he asked me if I wanted to coach or play. I had played some, and so I started getting with George. His son plays ice hockey. I'm like, where are the rinks around here? And I didn't realize I'm like right down the street from University of Denver arena. But anyway, I was never able to get the skates on, so I decided I'm going to coach. So we had 2 teams. Basically, it was an alumni game, the Blues alumni versus the NHL alumni. And I had the NHL alumni, and there's a star-studded cast of players. But my biggest concern, it's the only sport that substitutes on the fly, really. It's pretty interesting. And so, everyone's getting in about the same time, the morning of, and we have a game in 5 hours, and I'm thinking, who's in charge of the substitutions? I know I'm the coach, but like, how do you, and these guys, like, there's 17 players, jump over the wall, everyone slides to the left, they come off, and they had it all handled. No, it was fun. It was a great benefit, successful. I learned a lot. I pulled the goalie. I turned to Chelios and I said, hey, when do we pull a goalie? And he said, about 2.5 minutes. And then so I'm like, all right. And then Ray Whitney, I said, Wiz, you're going to be our extra man. And so we pulled the goalie and scored to tie it up. Now, if I knew it was going to end in a tie, I would have just kept the goalie on the bench. But when I finished, I sent John Cooper a text, and I've known John for a while, the head coach at Tampa Bay, and I said, look, aside from putting on a coat and tie, I like your job description on game day. You stand behind the bench. These guys are jumping on and off the ice. I'll handle the goalie decision in the third quarter, third period. We played halves. Actually. We played a first half and second half. That was the only thing I was familiar with. But here's the one thing I came away from it, regardless, because we had the bigger team. We were ahead 4-2 at the half. We had the bigger team. They had the younger team. That concerned me in an alumni game. And the second half, it kind of flipped on us. And so, I think to see those guys at different age, guys in their 60s, 50s, and they jump back in these skates, and it's like riding a bike for them. It was fascinating to watch them skate, and it was a great event.
Sean, you said at the owners' meetings it would be potentially realistic to trade up high in the draft. Since then, is it more realistic since then, less realistic since maybe you've learned what the price could be? And would you be willing to trade several future first-round picks, the Broncos, if it took that?
Well, I mean, look, the hypothetical relative to what the compensation is it's a lot of times driven by who else is interested. So, is George, and he's talked to all these teams in front of us, and obviously, depending on how much further you go up, and then it's also if there's someone else doing the same thing. And so that, I think George said it best at the very beginning, that certainly is a possibility. And then it's how much you can pallet.
How do you haven't had first-round picks the previous 2 years, and now you have one. How would you feel about, last George feeling trading future first-round picks?
Yeah, I would just say if it's a player you think can change the landscape of your organization moving forward, like a quarterback, then you do whatever you take to get him. And if there's a consensus in the building, a love in the building, you're aggressive and you try to get him. Doesn't mean you're going to get him, but you try. And so we're open to everything. We're wide open.
The fascinating thing relative to first-round picks, you also have to, and it's sometimes hard to do, but when you deal in futures, if you think you're going to be picking in the middle, or when you deal in futures like 2 years out, then there's this, we got to get, you don't want to be, so you're dealing in an unknown value-wise. We say it's a first, but the difference between 4 and 24 is pretty significant. So there's a lot that goes into that. And then there's like George and they'll be able to give us a history of, all right, in the last 5 years, this is what it looks like. We've seen it, Chicago, San Francisco, different landmarks from where they're traveling. And then you have to, in either case, you have to have suitors, forward or backward, obviously.
For both of you, what would you say your need is at corner and edge?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always looking for corners, edge, value type positions. We like our corner group. We have one of the best corners in the league. We like our nickel and J-Mac. We have 2 young outside guys, Riley and Damari and Tremont. So we have a good young group. They're younger. So we like the group. You always want, you're always looking to add at those type of positions. The outside backer group, we have 3 that are really talented. Benito Browning, Jonathan Cooper. We have a young Drew Sanders if he stays outside. So we like the group, but you're always looking at those type of positions. They're hard to find. Someone falls in your lap, you're going to take them.
With the change in the kickoff rules, does that change how you evaluate players in terms of body type, and does it change the value that you would assign to overall players now that a kickoff has been reemphasized?
Man, I think it's a great question. It's fun that we're doing, when I say it's fun, I think there's a little unknown. I think the distance traveled is going to be not as far. So, when you're covering a kick, speed was fairly important relative to getting, as a coverage unit, getting down the field and getting to the ball carrier. And we've taken that whole group and said, all right, we're going to put you guys 10 yards away. I think certainly you could see probably a little heavier unit then, where speed, it's certainly going to put a premium on your 2 returners, because you have to have 2 and then that box where you're kicking the ball to, these guys like third basemen are going to have to be able to field, these kicks pretty cleanly but we were for it for a lot of reasons. We add a lot of play. We feel like we're one of the better special teams units. We feel like last year we made a lot of gains there. We've got a good returner. We certainly, as you look at the personnel, though, I think the blocking schemes as you return it, this is gonna evolve quickly, I think. And to your point, do the body types possibly change? Yeah. How much does that change? When we see teams, players in the draft, there's a few elements. There's traits, all of that, but then there's also this mindset, that some players possess that tend to maybe transfer over into that level. But I think it is something we're studying, and it'll be interesting.
Take us inside the war room. When you guys disagree on a player, how do you find compromise, especially when you're on the clock, right? You do an arm wrestle, rock, paper, scissors. Like, how do you guys get through that?
Those conversations are done typically before the draft. And, when we have a difference of opinion, whether it's Sean, myself and another coach, we just watch. We just get more information, gather more information. Typically, that involves watching more tape together. We have group studies going on throughout our building right now for these clusters that I talked about, to try to break a tie. We have a, so I would say it rarely gets to draft day. These discussions, we've had so many discussions. We spent so many hours in our draft room that we've had most of these discussions. Our board will have been set. So that rarely comes up in my 20-something years.
We have fun debate, like we're playing around. I mean, today, there's, call it 3 segments in each round, and there's a group of players within that framework, and we're discussing, the middle of the 4th, let's say, these 6 players, do we see, and it's not like without disagreement sometimes. I mean, he and I on one position group have a haircut wagered on who goes first. But they're right there. And so it's man, this is this is the time. This process, it's interesting because I think I really like, we go through the 2 weeks of readings with the scouts and the coaches, and then there's another week and a half where we're doing exactly what George said. We're taking a segment later today. We'll be later, let's say later in this draft, and a lot of times when the draft ends and you're signing free agents, they may be players that might be on your 6th round stack or your 7th round stack, and then really trying to order those relative to the funds you have after the draft to pay them and prioritize, and so, in my time, I would agree with George. I can't ever recall like one of those on draft day. I mean, it would be during the process where then you'd get more film out and you're like, there's no way, or, so we got a haircut wagered.
I mean, every now and then Sean will say during the draft, I really want this player, let's go get him. But that's the extent of it. And, but that's kind of the communication throughout the draft.
There's certain players that you always talk need versus talent, and I think one of the things that's really important is we constantly articulate the vision. Like, all right, what do we see in year 1? Is he competing to make the 53, possible practice squad player? Do we see a guy who's going to start? Do we see a guy who's going to, really articulate the vision? And so certainly there are certain positions within the framework of our team right now where the vision could be clearer maybe than other positions. And yet that's when we're talking about a clump that's so, then that factors in. But, it's got to be all done ahead of time. I mean, and the process is, I don't want to say it's enjoyable though. It's like, it's long, you're in those rooms, but you get to know these guys.
We'll spend 4 hours on 10 guys that we project in the 5th round, and there may be 2 of them there. So we're doing all the work. By the time you get to the 5th round and you've talked about those players, a lot of them will be gone. So it's just kind of, the board kind of falls the way it falls if you've stacked it correctly and you spend a lot of time you've invested in it.
And then the obvious, you took somebody, earlier, and now you're in this clump of, then maybe it affects, doesn't mean if the one's graded higher, you take another at that position, but there are a lot of things that go into it.
Thank you.